He signed the form without reading it twice. "Do whatever you have to," Logan Cole said, already turning toward the exit. "Just don't call me again about this." The words landed in the emergency room like something colder than silence. Nurse Megan Brooks froze with the chart in her hand. Dr. Daniel Harris didn't respond immediately. They had both seen indifference before, but not like this. Not with a wife still unconscious on the table. Behind the glass doors, the hospital lights reflected off polished floors that didn't belong to strangers. Logan didn't notice. He walked out on Ella Vaughn, and he never once asked whose hospital he was leaving her in. Before this story unfolds, stay with it not just for what happens, but for what it reveals. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it waits. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, take a moment to share your location and local time in the comments. It's a quiet way of reminding each other that truth travels far. And if you believe that dignity deserves to be seen even when it stands in silence, consider subscribing. Not for noise, but for stories that remember. Ella Vaughn regained consciousness without urgency. There was no sudden gasp, no dramatic movement. Just a slow return to awareness, like someone stepping back into a room they had never truly left. The ceiling above her was a familiar shade of white, not the sterile anonymity of most hospitals, but something softer, warmer, intentional. She noticed that first. Then the rhythm. A monitor to her right pulsed in steady intervals. Another machine hummed low, almost respectfully, as if careful not to disturb. The air carried the faint scent of antiseptic, but beneath it something else. Clean linen. Lavender, perhaps. Subtle. Designed. Ella didn't move her head immediately. She listened. Footsteps outside the room. Rubber soles against polished flooring. A distant cart rolling. The muted exchange of voices, professional controlled. No one sounded alarmed. Good. Her fingers twitched slightly against the blanket, not weak, responsive. She registered the weight of the IV line, the tightness along her ribs, the dull contained ache in her left shoulder. Pain, but organized. Managed. Her body had been cared for properly. That mattered. Only then did she open her eyes fully. The room came into focus gradually. Private. Spacious. A window along the far wall filtered in late afternoon light. Not harsh, angled. The kind of light architects plan for. Ella let her gaze move slowly, deliberately. Door. Closed. Chair. Occupied. Nurse Megan Brooks sat near the corner, posture straight but not rigid. She wasn't scrolling her phone. She wasn't distracted. Her attention, though subtle, had been fixed on the bed long before Ella opened her eyes. That too mattered. Their eyes met. For a brief second, something passed across Megan's face, not surprise, not relief exactly. Recognition. "You're awake," Megan said, quietly standing. Her voice was calm, measured, no unnecessary brightness. Ella didn't respond right away. She watched the nurse instead. Megan stepped closer, checking the monitor with practiced efficiency, but her movements were careful, slightly more precise than routine required. "You've been stable," Megan continued. "The surgery went well. Dr. Harris will want to see you." Ella blinked once. "Surgery," she repeated, her voice low-textured from disuse. "Yes." Megan adjusted the IV line. "Internal bleeding, a fracture in your shoulder. You were brought in just in time." Just in time. Ella let the words settle without reacting. "How long?" she asked. "About 18 hours since admission." 18 hours. Enough time for decisions to be made. Ella shifted her gaze toward the side table. No personal belongings, no phone, no bag. Standard protocol, but still she noted it. "Who signed the consent?" she asked. The question came too quickly, too precisely for someone who had just regained consciousness. Megan hesitated. "Not long, just enough." "Your husband was here," she said. "He handled the initial paperwork." Handled. Ella absorbed the word. "He left?" she asked. Megan didn't answer immediately this time. "Yes." No elaboration. No justification. Ella's eyes returned to the ceiling. There it was. Not shock. Not grief. Confirmation. She had already known. Not the details, but the direction. "Time?" Ella asked. 4:12 p.m. Ella nodded slightly. Her mind had already begun organizing. Timeline, accident, admission, surgery, signature, departure, a sequence, clean, linear. What did he say? She asked. Megan's fingers tightened slightly around the chart. I'm not sure that's what did he say, Ella repeated, her tone unchanged. No pressure, no emotion, just clarity. Megan inhaled once, then answered. He authorized treatment, she said carefully, and indicated he didn't want to be contacted further unless absolutely necessary. The room remained still. Ella closed her eyes briefly, not to escape but to store the information. Not to be contacted. She pictured it, the form, the signature, the moment he turned away. No hesitation. That told her more than any explanation could. Was anyone else present? Ella asked. Dr. Harris. And myself. Security. Megan blinked, slightly caught off guard. No, not at that moment. Ella nodded again. Another piece placed. The door opened softly. Dr. Daniel Harris entered without haste. Mid-50s, composed, his expression neutral but attentive. He stopped just inside the room, not rushing to the bedside. He waited. Ella opened her eyes again and looked directly at him. Dr. Harris, she said. He inclined his head slightly. Miss Vaughn, not Mrs. Cole. Not Mrs. anything. Megan noticed it. So did Ella. You're recovering well, he continued. We were concerned about internal bleeding, but the intervention was timely. Complications? Ella asked. None at present. Records complete. A pause. Dr. Harris studied her not as a patient, but as someone assessing the structure of a system. Yes, he said. Everything has been documented. Ella held his gaze for a moment longer. Then quietly, I'd like access to my admission file. Megan shifted slightly. Dr. Harris didn't. That can be arranged, he said. No, Ella replied. I'd like it now. Silence settled, not uncomfortable but waited. Dr. Harris glanced once at Megan. Something unspoken passed between them. He turned back to Ella. Of course. No resistance. That mattered more than compliance. Megan moved toward the station outside. As the door closed behind her, the room felt different, not emptier but more defined. Ella adjusted her breathing slightly, ignoring the pull of pain in her ribs. Who else knows? She asked. Dr. Harris didn't pretend to misunderstand. The board has been notified of your condition, he said, discreetly. Names. He listed them. Ella listened without interruption, each name placed carefully in her mind. Trust. Neutral. Unknown. When he finished, she nodded. Thank you. No further questions. No emotional inquiry. No mention of Logan. Dr. Harris observed her for a moment longer. You should rest, he said. I will, Ella replied. But they both understood that rest was no longer the priority. The door opened again. Megan returned, holding a slim folder. Not a digital tablet. Paper. Intentional. She handed it to Dr. Harris, who then placed it gently on the bedside table within Ella's reach. Ella didn't open it immediately. She looked at it first. Then at Megan. Thank you, she said. Megan nodded, but there was something else in her expression now. Not just professionalism. Respect. Ella turned her attention back to the folder. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully as she opened it. Admission time. Medical notes. Signatures. There. Logan Cole. The ink was slightly heavier at the beginning of his name, pressed harder than necessary. A small detail. But Ella noticed. Below it, spouse authorized treatment. And further down, emergency contact declined further notification unless critical. Ella traced the line once with her eyes, then closed the folder. No reaction. No visible shift. But something had settled into place. Not anger. Not yet. Structure. Clarity. Direction. She leaned back slightly into the pillow, eyes drifting once more toward the window. The light had shifted. Evening now. Time had moved. So would she. Miss Vaughn, Megan said softly. Ella turned her head just enough. Yes. Is there anyone you'd like us to contact? A reasonable question. Expected. Ella held her gaze for a moment, then answered, "Not yet." Because this wasn't the moment to call. This was the moment to understand. And Ella Vaughn had always understood one thing better than most. Silence, when used correctly, was not absence. It was preparation. Long before the accident, before the sterile light and controlled silence of the hospital room, before signatures and absences, Ella Vaughn had already learned how to disappear in plain sight. It was not weakness. It was design. Ella had never been the kind of woman who needed to be seen to be effective. She understood early, long before Logan Cole ever entered her life, that visibility often came at the cost of control. And control to her was not loud. It was structural. It was quiet decisions made years in advance, invisible until they mattered. Logan met her at a time when none of that seemed relevant. Back then he was just a man with ambition and a sharp instinct for opportunity. He worked long hours, spoke with confidence that bordered on certainty, and carried himself like someone who believed success was inevitable, even when the numbers didn't support it yet. They met at a small networking event in Chicago. Nothing extravagant. A rented space, modest catering, people exchanging business cards with practiced enthusiasm. Ella had attended out of obligation. Logan had attended out of necessity. He noticed her first. Not because she was the loudest in the room, she wasn't, but because she didn't compete for attention. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, people adjusted. Subtly, but consistently. That interested him. He approached with confidence. Logan Cole, he introduced himself, offering a handshake that lingered just a second longer than required. "Ella Vaughn," she replied. No elaboration. No explanation of who she was, what she owned, or what her name carried. Just that. Logan didn't recognize it immediately, but others in the room did. A slight shift in posture. A pause before responding. Respect that didn't need to be announced. He assumed it was presence. He didn't yet understand it was position. Their conversations were easy at first. Logan spoke about expansion plans, about scaling a logistics startup he had recently launched. He had numbers, projected growth, potential partnerships, future reach. Ella listened. She asked questions not to challenge him, but to understand the structure behind his thinking. "What's your contingency if your second quarter projections miss by 10%? She asked once. Logan smiled, slightly amused. "They won't." Ella didn't argue. She simply nodded. But later, when the conversation shifted, she introduced him casually to someone who specialized in risk assessment for emerging companies. No explanation. No credit taken. Just a connection. That was how it began. Not with declarations, but with small adjustments. Logan's company stabilized faster than expected. Funding opportunities appeared not directly from Ella, but through networks that seemed to open once she was involved. Legal complications were resolved quietly. A contract that might have stalled for months moved forward in days. Logan noticed the outcomes. He didn't always notice the source. Ella never corrected him. That was her pattern. Support without spotlight. Influence without acknowledgement. And Logan, like many before him, interpreted that as alignment, not leverage. Their relationship developed naturally, at least on the surface. Dinners became routine. Conversations extended beyond business. Logan spoke about his past, about building himself up, about not relying on anyone, about proving that success could be self-made. Ella listened to that too. She never contradicted him, even when the reality had already begun to shift. By the time they married, Logan's company had grown significantly. Not into an empire, but into something respectable, something visible. And in that visibility, a narrative formed. Logan Cole, self-made entrepreneur. It was clean, simple, believable. Ella remained in the background, not hidden but undefined. She kept her surname, maintained her own accounts, continued her involvement with the Vaughn Foundation, though rarely in ways that drew public attention. The Hospital Street Meridian Medical Center was one of several holdings under that foundation. A controlling interest quietly structured through layered ownership. Logan knew she came from money. He did not know the extent. He never asked in detail. And Ella never volunteered. Because disclosure to her was not about honesty alone. It was about timing. For a while, the balance held. Logan worked. Ella supported. Their lives moved forward without visible conflict. But changes rarely announce themselves at the beginning. They appear in patterns, small, almost dismissible. Logan began taking more calls privately, stepping out of rooms to answer messages. At first it was business. That was reasonable. Ella didn't question it. Then came the financial shifts. Subtle. Transfers between accounts that didn't align with previous structures. Investments Ella hadn't been informed about, not because she required permission, but because transparency had once been part of their rhythm. She noticed. She always noticed. But she didn't confront. Instead, she adjusted her observation, watched timelines, compared records, listened more carefully to what wasn't being said. There were dinners Logan missed, trips extended without clear explanation. When he did explain, the details were sufficient, but not precise. Ella never accused him of lying. She simply stopped relying on what he said. That was the shift. Not emotional, operational. One evening, months before the accident, Logan mentioned a new marketing lead he had brought onto a project. Claire Donovan, he said. She's sharp, knows how to position things. Ella nodded. What's her background? She asked. Corporate branding. Worked with a few big firms. Long-term hire, maybe. Logan shrugged. Depends how things go. Ella didn't pursue it further, but she remembered the name. Claire Donovan. It would appear again. At the time, it was just another detail. Another entry in a mental ledger Ella maintained without writing. Because writing in her world came later, when patterns required proof. Logan's behavior didn't change all at once. It evolved. Confidence became distance. Distance became omission. And omission eventually became absence. Not physical at first, but present enough to be measured. Ella didn't react emotionally to any of it. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand explanations, because she understood something Logan didn't. Control wasn't about stopping someone from acting. It was about allowing them to reveal themselves completely, without interruption, without resistance. So she let the pattern continue. Let the calls go unanswered. Let the financial discrepancies accumulate. Let the narrative Logan was building about independence, about success, about separation develop without interference. Because the more complete it became, the clearer it would be. And clarity, when documented, required no argument. By the time the accident happened, the marriage had already shifted into something else. Not broken, not publicly, but structurally altered. Logan still believed he was moving freely, that his decisions were his own, that whatever he was building outside the marriage existed beyond Ella's reach. He didn't see the framework, didn't understand that the systems he relied on, the accounts, the access, the infrastructure, were not neutral. They had origins, and those origins had never been removed, only ignored. Ella, lying in the hospital bed, now understood all of it, not as a sudden realization, but as the natural conclusion of a process she had been observing for months. The accident hadn't created the truth. It had only revealed its timing, and Logan, in choosing to leave when he did, in signing his name and walking away, had done something Ella would never have forced. He had finalized the pattern. On record. In ink. Without knowing what that record belonged to, Ella closed her eyes again, not from exhaustion but from completion. There was no need to revisit the past further. It had already given her everything she needed. From this point forward, there would be no more observation without action. Only sequence. Only structure. Only outcome. And Ella Vaughn had always been patient with outcomes. By the second morning, the hospital had settled into a rhythm around Ella Vaughn. Not the usual rhythm of recovery. There were no frequent visitors, no flowers lining the windowsill, no quiet reassurances from family members holding her hand. Instead, there was something more controlled, intentional, measured silence. Ella noticed it immediately. Nurse Megan Brooks entered at precisely 7:10 a.m. as she had the previous day. The same sequence followed: vitals checked, medication adjusted, chart updated. Efficient. Consistent. But there was an added layer now. Awareness. Megan no longer observed Ella as just a patient. There was a subtle recalibration in her posture, in the way she spoke, slightly more formal, slightly more deliberate. Respect had replaced routine. Pain level, Megan asked, adjusting the IV. Manageable, Ella replied. That was all. No elaboration, No complaint. Megan nodded and made a note, though her eyes lingered for half a second longer than necessary. She wanted to ask something. Ella could see it, but she didn't. Professional boundaries held. That too mattered. After Megan left the room, returned to stillness, Ella reached slowly toward the bedside table, retrieving the folder she had closed the night before. This time she opened it again. Not to reread everything, but to confirm sequence. Admission time 10:34 p.m. Surgery initiated 11:12 p.m. Consent signed 10:47 p.m. She paused there. The timestamp sat quietly beneath Logan's name. 13 minutes. From arrival to signature. Not rushed, not hesitant. Decisive. Ella turned the page. Witnesses Daniel Harris, Megan Brooks. No anomalies. No missing data. Clean documentation. She closed the folder again. Her fingers rested lightly on its edge. Everything had been recorded properly, which meant everything could be used properly. The door opened again, and Dr. Daniel Harris stepped inside. "Good morning," he said. Ella inclined her head slightly. "Dr. Harris." He approached the bed, reviewing her chart without unnecessary commentary. "Your vitals remain stable. We'll begin reducing medication today." Ella nodded. "Mobility," she asked. "Limited for now. Shoulder needs time. But you'll be able to sit up for longer periods." Ella considered that. "Good." There was a brief pause. "Then I'd like access to the security footage from last night," she said. Dr. Harris looked up, not surprised, but attentive. "That can be arranged," he replied carefully. "I want the full sequence," Ella continued. "From arrival to departure." Dr. Harris held her gaze for a moment. Understood. No questions. No hesitation. Just acknowledgement. Because by now there was no ambiguity left in the room about who Ella Vaughn was. The door closed behind him, and once again the room returned to quiet. But not empty quiet. Prepared quiet. Ella adjusted herself slightly against the pillows, ignoring the strain in her shoulder. Her breathing remained even. Pain was data. Manageable. Irrelevant to the larger structure. Her attention shifted instead to absence. Logan had not returned. Not overnight. Not in the morning. No calls. No messages. No attempt to check. Ella didn't need confirmation of that. If there had been contact, Megan would have said something. The staff would have adjusted their tone. Nothing had changed, which meant everything had. She reached toward the small notepad Megan had left earlier, a simple item likely for patient comfort. Ella turned it into something else. A record. She began writing. Not sentences, not reflections, just points. 10:34 p.m. Admission, 10:47 p.m. Signature, Logan Cole. Witnesses present. Statement. Do not contact unless necessary. Departure, immediate. She paused, then added, no return within 36 hours. The pen moved steadily. No hesitation. Each entry clean, spaced, precise. Because memory, while reliable, was never enough. Documentation was. A soft knock interrupted her. Megan returned this time carrying a tablet. "Dr. Harris said you requested footage," she said. Ella nodded. Megan hesitated for just a fraction of a second before stepping closer. "There are protocols," she added carefully. "Normally this would require administrative clearance." Ella looked at her. Not sharply, not with pressure, just directly. "Has clearance been denied?" she asked. Megan swallowed lightly. "No." Ella held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Then we proceed." Megan handed her the tablet. The screen was already open, paused. Timestamp visible. Ella adjusted her position slightly and tapped the screen. The footage began. Emergency room entrance. Paramedics rushing in. Controlled urgency. Ella watched without expression. They moved quickly, transferring her onto the bed, voices overlapping but efficient. Then Logan. He appeared at the edge of the frame, standing, watching, not interfering, not assisting, just present. Ella's eyes didn't flicker. The video continued. A nurse approached him, Megan, earlier in the timeline. She spoke. Logan nodded. Followed. The scene shifted. Hallway. Paperwork. A clipboard extended. Logan took it. Ella slowed the playback slightly. His posture. Relaxed. Shoulders steady. No visible distress. He read the form. Not long. Then signed. The pen pressed firmly at the start of his name. Just as she had seen on paper. Consistency. The video moved forward. Dr. Harris spoke to him. The audio wasn't clear, but the body language was. Explanation. Options. Logan listened. Then he said something. Short. Dismissive. Even without sound, the tone was visible. A slight wave of the hand. A step back. And then he turned, walked toward the exit. No pause. No glance back. The automatic doors opened. Closed. He was gone. Ella stopped the video. The room returned to silence. Megan stood nearby, unsure whether to remain or step out. Ella handed the tablet back. "Thank you," she said. Megan took it, her expression composed but tighter now. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked. Ella considered the question. Then, no. Megan nodded and left. The door closed softly. Ella leaned back again, eyes resting on the ceiling. There it was. Not interpretation. Not assumption. Record. Complete. Logan hadn't hesitated. He hadn't struggled. He hadn't been overwhelmed. He had chosen, and he had done it on camera. Ella closed her eyes briefly. Not to process emotion, but to finalize understanding. There would be no need to question his intent later. No need to debate memory. No need to reconstruct. Everything existed exactly as it had happened. And more importantly, it existed within a system Ella understood completely, a system she had helped build. The hospital wasn't just a place of treatment. It was a structure of records, of accountability, of traceable actions. Every movement logged, every decision documented. And Logan had walked into that structure, signed his name, and walked out, believing he was leaving something behind. He wasn't. He had entered something. Ella opened her eyes again. The light in the room had shifted slightly. Late morning now. Time continued, as it always did. She reached for the notepad again, added one more line. Video confirmed voluntary departure. Then she placed the pen down. No emphasis, no underline, just fact. Outside the room, the hospital continued its quiet operations. Doctors moved between patients. Nurses updated charts. Systems functioned, unaware or perhaps fully aware of what had just begun. Because for Ella Vaughn, this was no longer about absence. It was about sequence. And sequences once started did not reverse. They completed. By the third day, Ella Vaughn no longer needed confirmation of what had happened. What she needed instead was structure, something beyond observation, something that could translate memory and recorded fact into a framework that would hold under scrutiny. The hospital room, with its quiet precision and controlled atmosphere, had already given her the first layer of that structured time documentation and visual proof. But those alone were never enough. They formed a narrative, yes, but not yet a case. Ella understood the difference. That morning she requested access not to medical records but to financial ones. The request did not come with urgency, nor did it carry visible emotion. It was delivered the same way she had asked for everything else, calmly, directly, without explanation. When Megan Brooks related to administration, there was a brief pause on the other end of the internal line. Not resistance, but recognition. Within an hour, attorney Michael Reed arrived. He did not enter the room like someone unfamiliar with the space. His presence carried a familiarity that suggested long-standing association, not with Ella as a patient, but with Ella as a decision-maker. Mid-40s, composed with a demeanor that leaned toward restraint rather than assertion. Michael Reed had built his reputation on understanding not only the law, but the timing of its application. He closed the door behind him and approached the bed without extending a hand. "Miss Vaughn," he said. Ella inclined her head slightly. "Michael." There was no need for introductions. He placed a slim leather folder on the table beside her bed but did not open it immediately. Instead, he waited a small but deliberate acknowledgement that whatever would unfold in the next hour would not be directed by him. "You requested access to shared financial records," he said. "I did. And full authorization, yes." He studied her for a moment, not as a lawyer assessing a client, but as someone confirming readiness. "You understand what that implies," he said carefully. Ella met his gaze without hesitation. "It implies clarity," she replied. Michael nodded once, then opened the folder. Inside were printed statements, transaction logs, and account summaries, documents that had already been compiled with efficiency that suggested anticipation rather than reaction. He began with the joint account. "Over the last 6 months," he said, turning the first page toward her, "there have been a series of transfers that fall outside your previously established patterns." Ella leaned slightly forward, her attention focused not on the amounts first, but on the dates. Patterns always revealed themselves through time before they revealed themselves through value. "These transfers," Michael continued, "were executed in intervals that correspond with specific external engagements. Business travel, late meetings, and what appear to be undocumented consultations." Ella traced one line lightly with her eyes. "Frequency increased?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, "particularly in the last 8 weeks." He turned another page. The numbers became more distinct now, not excessive in isolation, but consistent enough to form a pattern when viewed collectively. Ella did not react. Instead, she asked destination. Michael paused for a fraction of a second before answering. "A secondary account," he said. "Registered under the name Claire Donovan." The name settled into the room with a quiet familiarity. Ella did not repeat it. She had no need to. Michael continued, sliding another document forward. "This account was established approximately 4 months ago. Initial deposits were modest, but they increased in both size and regularity over time." Ella's gaze moved across the page, absorbing not just the figures, but the progression. This was not impulsive behavior. It was structured, intentional. "Was the account linked to any of Logan's known business entities?" she asked. "No," Michael replied. "It exists independently. No formal connection to his company records," which meant concealment, not oversight. Ella leaned back slightly, the movement slow but deliberate. "Email correspondence," she said. Michael did not ask how she had anticipated it. He simply turned to the next section. "Printed emails, carefully selected, organized chronologically. Recovered through authorized access points," he explained. "Nothing obtained improperly." Ella appreciated that distinction. Legitimacy mattered. She began reading. The tone of the messages shifted gradually over time. At first professional, logistical, language that could be explained if necessary. Then more familiar, more direct. References to meetings that did not align with official schedules. Discussions of future planning that extended beyond business. And eventually clarity. Statements that no longer required interpretation. Logan writing about restructuring assets, about separating complications, about timing. Ella's eyes moved steadily, never pausing long enough to suggest hesitation. There was no visible reaction. But internally, each piece aligned with what she had already observed. Nothing contradicted the pattern. Everything reinforced it. Michael watched her carefully, not for signs of distress, but for signs of direction. When she finished the final page, she closed the folder gently. "Is this complete?" she asked. Michael considered the question before answering. "It is sufficient," he said, "but not yet exhaustive." Ella nodded. "Sufficient is acceptable for now." There was a brief silence, not empty but evaluative. "Then next steps," Michael said. Ella did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked toward the window where the light had shifted into late afternoon, casting long, controlled shadows across the room. When she spoke, her voice remained even. "No action yet," she said. Michael's expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, an acknowledgement that the decision aligned with expectation. "We continue gathering," Ella added. Quietly. He nodded. "And Logan?" he asked. Ella's gaze returned to him. "What about him? He may attempt contact," Michael said. "Or access." Ella considered that for a moment. "Restrict nothing," she said. "For now." Michael understood immediately. Monitoring required openness. Interference altered behavior. And behavior at this stage was still valuable. "I'll ensure oversight without disruption," he said. Ella inclined her head slightly. "Good." He began to close the folder, then paused. "There is one more detail," he said. Ella waited. Michael placed a single document on top of the others. A transfer authorization form. Logan's signature again. But this time, the date aligned with the night of the accident. Ella's eyes moved to the timestamp. Executed less than an hour before her admission. The sequence became clearer. Not only had Logan signed her medical consent and left, he had also completed a financial transfer that same evening. Ella did not comment immediately, but the connection had already been made. "This was processed shortly before the incident was reported," Michael said. Ella closed her eyes briefly. Not in reaction, but in recognition of completion. The pattern was no longer developing. It had already concluded. When she opened her eyes again, her expression remained unchanged. But something had shifted, not emotionally, but structurally. "We proceed," she said. Michael nodded. No further clarification required. He gathered the documents carefully, leaving only a copy of the essential pages within her reach. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Miss Vaughn," he said. Ella looked at him. "Everything we do from this point forward will be visible," he added. Ella held his gaze. "Only when it needs to be," she replied. Michael inclined his head once, then left the room. The door closed softly behind him. Ella remained still, her eyes resting once more on the documents before her. The numbers, the names, the signatures, they no longer represented uncertainty. They represented direction. Outside, the hospital continued its steady rhythm. Inside, the structure had shifted. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but irreversibly. And Ella Vaughn, who had spent months observing without interruption, now had something she had been waiting for, not proof of betrayal, but proof of pattern. And patterns once documented did not require confrontation. They required execution. Claire Donovan did not consider herself the kind of woman who made careless decisions. Her life, by most visible measures, had been built on intention. She had earned her position through long hours, calculated risks, and an ability to read people with a precision that often placed her one step ahead in professional environments. In the marketing division of Logan Cole's company, she had established herself quickly, not by being loud, but by being effective. She understood perception. She understood narrative. And perhaps most importantly, she understood how easily both could be shaped. That was why when Logan first spoke about his marriage, she listened carefully, not just to what he said, but to how he said it. It had begun months earlier in a conference room filled with projected slides and muted conversations about branding strategy. Logan had introduced her to the team as someone who could redefine how the company positioned itself. The phrasing had been intentional. It created expectation without explaining specifics. Claire delivered. Within weeks, she had reorganized their external messaging, streamlined client communication, and repositioned Logan's personal brand into something more refined, more authoritative, more independent. That last part mattered more than Logan realized, because independence once framed publicly often demanded private alignment. It was during one of their late meetings, long after the rest of the office had emptied, that Logan first mentioned Ella. Not with hostility, not even with resentment, but with distance. "It's complicated," he had said, leaning back in his chair, his tone casual enough to suggest control but measured enough to imply something unresolved. Claire did not interrupt. She had learned long ago that people revealed more when not prompted. "We've been separated in everything but paperwork," Logan continued. "Different priorities, different lives." Claire nodded slightly, not offering judgment. "And financially," she asked, her voice neutral. Logan gave a small, almost dismissive shrug. "It's being handled," he said. "There are structures in place." Structures. The word was vague, but it suggested order. Claire accepted it, not because she fully understood it, but because it aligned with the image Logan had been building of a man in transition, managing complexities with quiet control. Over time, their conversations shifted, from business to personal, from strategy to implication. Logan never explicitly declared an end to his marriage, but he spoke of it as something already concluded, a formality waiting to be processed. Claire, who valued clarity, noticed the absence of specifics, but she also recognized something else: consistency. Logan's narrative did not change, and consistency in her experience often indicated truth, or at least a truth someone had chosen to maintain. Their relationship developed gradually, not impulsively, not dramatically. It was built in extended conversations, shared decisions, and the kind of proximity that came from working closely under pressure. Logan began to rely on her not just for professional input but for perspective. He asked for her opinion on expansion plans, on investments, on timing. Claire responded with the same measured approach she applied to everything else: analyzing, adjusting, refining. At some point, the boundary shifted, not in a single moment, but in a series of small, almost imperceptible changes. A dinner after a late meeting, a message sent outside of business hours, a conversation that extended beyond necessity. Claire did not rush to define it. She allowed it to become what it was becoming, because in her mind the foundation had already been explained. Logan was leaving his marriage. Everything else was transition. When the first financial transfer appeared in her account, she noticed it immediately. Not because it was large, but because it was unexpected. She called him. "You sent something," she said. "Yes," Logan replied. "Consider it." "A restructuring." Claire paused. "Of what future planning?" he said. "It's easier to move things gradually." The explanation was incomplete, but not entirely unreasonable. Claire had seen similar strategies used in corporate environments: assets repositioned ahead of formal changes. It suggested foresight, preparation. She accepted it, not blindly but without resistance. Over the following weeks, the transfers continued, increasing slightly, remaining consistent, always accompanied by explanations that framed them as temporary, strategic, necessary. Claire did not question the legality. She assumed it, because Logan never behaved like someone acting outside the law. He was careful, measured, controlled. Those qualities had defined him from the beginning, or so she believed. On the night of the accident, Claire had been waiting. They had planned to meet, nothing elaborate, just a quiet dinner to discuss a new campaign that Logan insisted would change everything. He had sounded confident, more than usual, as if something had finally aligned. When he didn't arrive, she sent a message. No response. She called once, then again. Still nothing. Claire did not panic. She was not someone who reacted to absence immediately. Instead, she waited, observed the pattern. An hour passed. Then 2. By midnight, she stopped calling, not out of concern but out of calculation. If something significant had happened, she would be informed. If not, Logan would explain. The next morning, he did. His message was brief. "Something came up. I'll explain later." No detail. No apology. Claire read it once, then set her phone aside. The explanation would come when it came. She did not press, because pressing often disrupted the clarity she preferred. When Logan finally called that afternoon, his tone was controlled. Not rushed, not distressed. "There was an accident," he said. Claire sat still. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," he replied. "It wasn't me." A pause. "My wife," he added. Claire absorbed the word without reacting outwardly. Wife, not ex-wife, not separated. Present. And she asked. "She's in the hospital," Logan said. "Stable, I think." Claire repeated, her voice still even. "I handled what needed to be handled," he replied. "There's nothing else I can do right now. Nothing else." The phrasing was precise. Claire noticed it, but she did not challenge it. "Do you need to be there?" she asked. Logan hesitated for the first time. Then no. The answer settled into the space between them. Claire leaned back slightly in her chair. "Then we proceed as planned," she said. Logan exhaled softly. "Exactly." They spoke briefly about work after that. Logistics. Timelines. The conversation returned to familiar ground quickly, as if the interruption had been minor, as if the context had not shifted. When the call ended, Claire remained still for a moment longer, not questioning, not analyzing deeply, just noting, because something, though small, had changed. Not in what Logan said, but in what he didn't. Still, she chose not to pursue it, because in her experience clarity revealed itself over time, and forcing it too early often distorted the outcome. So she continued. With work, with plans, with the structure she believed they were building together, unaware that the structure itself had already been recorded elsewhere, that the patterns she trusted were being mirrored, documented, and prepared for a different kind of interpretation. Claire Donovan believed she understood the situation. She believed she was part of a transition, a future taking shape. What she did not yet see was that she was also part of a record. And records, unlike narratives, did not adjust themselves to belief. They waited until someone decided to read them in full. By the end of the week, Street Meridian Medical Center no longer functioned around uncertainty. It functioned around awareness. Not publicly, not in a way that disrupted its operations, but internally within the layers that governed decision-making, documentation, and authority. There was a quiet recalibration. Information had been identified, verified, and contained within a circle that did not expand without intention. Ella Vaughn had not issued any formal directive. She did not need to. Her presence alone, combined with the records already secured, had initiated a shift that moved through the institution with the kind of precision that could not be replicated through orders alone. It began with recognition. Dr. Daniel Harris convened a brief meeting in a conference room on the administrative floor, far removed from patient areas, insulated both physically and operationally. Present were 3 members of the hospital's executive board, the compliance officer and attorney Michael Reed. The meeting lasted less than 40 minutes. No voices were raised. No conclusions were dramatized. Instead, documents were reviewed. Footage was acknowledged. Timelines were aligned. Each participant understood the same thing. By the time the meeting ended, this was no longer a matter of personal circumstance. It was a matter of record. And records, when properly structured, carried obligations. Containment remains priority, Michael Reed said, his tone even as he closed the folder in front of him. No external disclosure. No deviation from protocol. The compliance officer nodded. All data access will be restricted to authorized channels only, she said. We'll log every retrieval. Dr. Harris added, staff involved directly will maintain standard conduct. No discussion outside professional scope. No one questioned these directives, because none of them originated as commands. They were extensions of a system that already existed, a system Ella had helped shape long before any of them had reason to apply it in this way. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. No formal vote. No written resolution. Only alignment. Upstairs in her room, Ella Vaughn remained unaware of the exact words exchanged, but she did not need to hear them to understand the outcome. She could see it in the details. Megan Brooks entered that afternoon with the same steady composure as before, but her movements carried an added layer of precision. Not caution, certainty. Your mobility assessment is scheduled for later today, Megan said, adjusting the positioning of Ella's arm support. Ella nodded. Any changes in access requests? She asked. Megan paused briefly, then answered. Your requests have been approved without delay. That was all, but it confirmed everything. No resistance, no procedural delay. The system had aligned. Ella shifted slightly, testing the controlled range of movement in her shoulder. The pain was present but contained, predictable. Predictability mattered, because unpredictability was what she had been observing in Logan. And now, for the first time since the accident, she was no longer reacting to it. She was positioning around it. Bring me the full incident report, Ella said. Megan hesitated. There isn't a formal. There will be, Ella replied, her tone calm but definitive. Compile it. Megan held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. Yes, Miss Vaughn. No further clarification required, because in that moment Ella had done something subtle but irreversible. She had moved from subject of the record to author of it. Downstairs in the hospital's digital archive system, access logs began to reflect increased activity within a restricted classification tier. Files related to Ella's admission, Logan's presence, and associated documentation were duplicated, not altered, not removed, but secured within a parallel structure. Every access point was time-stamped, every duplication recorded, every file verified for integrity. No one announced it. But the system was no longer passive. It was active, and it was preparing. Later that evening, Dr. Harris returned with a printed report. Not yet complete, but structured. Ella accepted it without comment and began reviewing immediately. The document outlined arrival time of emergency services, condition upon admission, medical interventions performed, authorization signature, witnesses present security footage reference. Each section was concise, objective, unembellished. Ella's eyes moved across the pages steadily, noting not only what was included but what was not. No assumptions, no interpretation, only fact. She reached the final page and closed the report. Add financial correlation, she said. Dr. Harris looked at her. Financial, he asked. Yes, Ella replied. Timestamp alignment with external transactions. There was a brief pause. Not confusion, but recalibration. That would extend beyond medical documentation, he said. Ella met his gaze. Then it becomes a supplemental report. Dr. Harris considered that for a moment. Then nodded. Understood. Because the boundary between medical and legal had just shifted. Not improperly, but intentionally. And once again, Ella had not forced the system to change. She had simply defined the next step. As Dr. Harris left the room, Ella leaned back, her eyes resting on the ceiling once more. Everything was moving now. Not quickly, but correctly. And that distinction mattered more than speed. Across the city, Logan Cole remained unaware of the structure forming around him. He had resumed his routine with minimal disruption. Meetings continued. Calls were answered. Plans moved forward. From his perspective, the accident had been contained. An unfortunate event managed efficiently. He had signed what needed to be signed, made the necessary decision, and removed himself from what he considered a situation without further requirement. The hospital to him was just that, a facility. A place where processes occurred independently of him. He did not consider what those processes recorded, or how those records were stored, or who controlled the system that housed them. Because Logan had never needed to think that way before. He had always operated within structures, never questioning their origin, never considering their ownership, and certainly never imagining that those structures could align without his knowledge. Back at Street Meridian, the alignment was complete. Not final, but sufficient. The hospital continued to function as it always had. Patients were admitted. Procedures were performed. Lives moved through its corridors without interruption. But beneath that continuity, something else existed, a contained, precise accumulation of fact. Ella Vaughn sat at the center of it, not as a patient, not as a victim, but as the only person who understood the full shape of what was being built. She did not rush it. She did not announce it. She did not even speak of it beyond what was necessary. Because she understood something that systems, when left alone, always revealed. They did not require force to function. Only direction. And direction, once established, did not need to be repeated. Ella closed her eyes, not out of fatigue, but out of completion. The hospital was no longer just a place where she had been brought. It had become what it had always been. A structure. One that recorded, one that preserved, one that, when necessary, could present everything exactly as it had occurred, without distortion, without omission, without noise. And somewhere within that structure, Logan Cole had already left his mark, not temporarily, not privately, but permanently. He simply did not know it yet. Logan Cole did not return to the hospital out of concern. He returned because something no longer aligned. It began with access. On the fourth morning after the accident, Logan attempted to authorize a transfer from one of his operational accounts, an action that under normal circumstances required nothing more than a standard authentication process. He had done it dozens of times before without interruption. This time the system responded differently. Access temporarily restricted. Please contact your financial administrator. The message appeared once, then again. Logan frowned, assuming it was a minor technical issue. He refreshed the interface, re-entered his credentials, and repeated the process with the same result. He checked another account. The same restriction. A third, unchanged. It was not a glitch. It was coordinated. Logan leaned back in his chair, his expression tightening not with panic but with irritation sharpened by unfamiliar resistance. He reached for his phone and called his financial manager, expecting immediate clarification. The call connected. Logan, the manager said, voice controlled but less fluid than usual. I was about to reach out. What's going on with my accounts? Logan asked, skipping any preamble. There was a brief pause. Certain authorizations have been suspended, the manager replied. Suspended by who? Logan asked, his tone flattening. By the controlling authority attached to the accounts. Logan's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. I am the controlling authority. Another pause. No, the manager said carefully. You are an authorized operator. The distinction landed. Logan did not respond immediately. Because for the first time in years, something he believed to be fully within his control had been redefined quietly and without his participation. Clarify, he said. The accounts are structured under a primary ownership entity, the manager continued. Recent actions have triggered a review. Until that review is complete, certain transactions are restricted. Logan stood. What actions? He asked. I don't have full visibility, the manager said, but the restriction is legitimate. Legitimate. The word carried weight. Not an error. Not a mistake. A decision. Logan ended the call without further comment. For several seconds he remained standing, the phone still in his hand, his thoughts reorganizing rapidly. Financial restriction. Primary ownership. Review. The pieces did not align with his understanding of his own structure, unless he did not complete the thought. Instead, he reached for another number. Claire Donovan. She answered on the second ring. Logan, have you had any issues with your account? He asked. A pause. No, Claire replied. Why? Check it, he said. There was a brief silence as she moved, likely retrieving her laptop or phone. A moment later. It's pending, she said. Some transfers are flagged. Logan closed his eyes briefly. The pattern extended. Not isolated. Systemic. Don't move anything, he said. I'll handle it. He ended the call before she could respond further. Now the situation had shifted from inconvenience to structure. And Logan understood structure well enough to recognize when he was no longer inside it. There was only one place that could clarify this. The hospital. He arrived at Street, Meridian Medical Center, just after noon. The building stood as it always had: clean lines, controlled movement, a space designed for order rather than emotion. Logan had been there only days before, but this time the environment felt different. Not visibly, but perceptibly. He approached the front desk with the same confidence he carried into most spaces, expecting recognition, expecting efficiency. I'm here to see my wife, he said. The receptionist, a woman in her early 30s with a composed expression and precise posture, looked up at him. Name? She asked. Logan Cole. She typed briefly, then paused. Her eyes returned to him, but something in her expression had shifted, slightly more formal, slightly more distant. I'll notify the floor, she said. No immediate access. No assumption of entry. Logan noticed. Is there a problem? He asked. No, sir, she replied. Standard procedure. The phrasing was neutral, but the delay remained. Within minutes, a nurse arrived, Megan Brooks. Logan recognized her immediately. She did not smile. Mr. Cole, she said. Follow me. Her tone was professional but devoid of familiarity. Logan walked beside her through the corridor, his gaze moving briefly across the environment. Staff moved with the same efficiency. Patients remained within their routines. Nothing appeared altered, and yet no one acknowledged him. No one paused. No one engaged. It was as if he had entered a space where his presence no longer carried relevance. They reached Ella's room. Megan stopped at the door. She's awake, she said. You may go in. Ella Vaughn was seated upright. Not fully. Her shoulder remained supported, but her posture was no longer that of a patient confined to recovery. She looked composed, alert, present. The difference was immediate. Logan paused for a fraction of a second before speaking. Ella, he said. Her eyes moved to him. No surprise, no visible reaction, just acknowledgement. "You're awake," he added, as if the observation required confirmation. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was steady, unstrained. Logan stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. "I came as soon as I could," he said. The sentence was delivered smoothly, practiced. Ella watched him, not evaluating the words, evaluating the structure behind them. "You signed the consent," she said. It was not a question. Logan nodded. "Of course," he replied. "They needed authorization. And then you left." Again, not a question. Logan shifted slightly. "I had things to handle," he said. "There wasn't anything else I could do here." Ella held his gaze. There was no accusation in her expression, no challenge, just stillness. "And now," she asked. Logan hesitated. The question, simple as it was, did not align with the script he had prepared. "I'm here now," he said. Ella inclined her head slightly. "Yes," she replied. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but precise. Logan glanced briefly around the room as if searching for something to anchor the conversation. "I heard about the surgery," he said. "You look stable." "I am," Ella replied. Another pause. Then Logan shifted direction. "There's something I need to understand," he said. Ella waited. "My accounts," he continued. "They've been restricted." Ella did not respond immediately. Instead, she adjusted her hand slightly on the blanket, a small movement that required no urgency. "Have they?" she said. Logan frowned slightly. "Yes," he said. "And it doesn't make sense." Ella's gaze remained steady. "It does," she replied. The words landed without emphasis, without explanation. Logan studied her. For the first time since entering the room, something in his expression changed. Not confusion, recognition, a possibility forming. "You know something," he said. Ella did not deny it. She did not confirm it either. She simply looked at him, and in that look there was something Logan had not accounted for. Position. Not emotional, not reactive, structural. He took a step closer. "What's going on?" he asked. Ella's voice remained even. "You signed your name," she said, "on multiple documents." Logan's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not unusual," he replied. "No," Ella said. "It isn't." Another pause. Then, "But context matters." The words settled between them. Logan exhaled slowly. "What context?" he asked. Ella did not answer directly. Instead, she looked toward the window briefly, where the light had shifted into early afternoon, then back at him. "You'll be informed," she said. "Not by her, by the system." Logan stared at her, for a moment longer than before, because something had changed. Not in the room, but in the structure he stood within. And for the first time, he was beginning to understand. He was no longer operating freely. He was being observed, recorded, positioned. And Ella Vaughn, sitting quietly in a hospital bed, was no longer simply recovering. She was waiting. By the time Logan left the hospital that afternoon, the shift in his position had already begun to take shape, even if he could not yet fully articulate it. What unsettled him was not a single answer, but the absence of access to answers that had once been immediate, unquestioned, and entirely within his control. The systems he had relied on for years, financial, operational, and even relational, were no longer responding in predictable ways, and that unpredictability created a kind of pressure he was not accustomed to managing. Inside her room, however, Ella Vaughn experienced no such pressure. What she experienced instead was progression. The encounter with Logan had not altered her understanding of the situation. It had confirmed it. More importantly, it had clarified his position within the structure she was now finalizing. He had not come with information, nor with accountability, nor even with awareness. He had come with expectation, an expectation that access would be restored simply by proximity, that presence alone could re-establish control. It could not. Ella sat with the folder Michael Reed had provided earlier, now supplemented by additional documents that had arrived in carefully organized increments throughout the afternoon. Each delivery had been precise, timed not to overwhelm, but to complete. The hospital's internal system, once activated, did not rush. It layered. Megan Brooks entered quietly, carrying another slim stack of printed records along with a secured tablet. "These just cleared authorization," she said, placing them on the table beside Ella. "Attorney Reed asked that you review them before tomorrow." Ella nodded, her gaze already shifting toward the new material. "Has anything been added beyond financials?" she asked. Megan hesitated briefly, then replied, "Communications. Internal and external." Ella acknowledged this without visible reaction. "That will be sufficient," she said. Megan remained for a moment, as though considering whether to say something further, but ultimately chose silence and left the room. Ella began with the communications. Unlike the earlier emails Michael had shown her, which had been selected for relevance, these records were more comprehensive. They included timestamps, metadata, and routing paths, details that extended beyond content into structure. For Ella, this was where clarity deepened. Content could be interpreted. Structure could not. She read methodically. Logan's messages to Claire Donovan followed a predictable progression, but what stood out now was not the tone, it was the timing. Messages sent late at night, often within minutes of internal financial activity. Replies that aligned with transfer confirmations. Discussions that overlapped with moments when Logan had claimed to be elsewhere. Ella did not pause to reflect on the implications emotionally. Instead, she traced the alignment. Email sent at 9:42 p.m. Transfer executed at 9:47 p.m. Follow-up message at 9:51 p.m. A pattern. She turned the page. Another sequence. Different day. Same structure. The consistency removed ambiguity. There was no longer any need to question whether the actions were connected. They were coordinated. Ella set the documents aside momentarily and reached for the tablet Megan had brought. The interface displayed a secured archive, video logs, access records, and system activity tied to specific time frames. She selected the night of the accident. The footage she had already seen from the emergency entrance was now extended with additional angles, hallway cameras, administrative stations, even the exterior exit where Logan had left the building. She watched without interruption. Each frame reinforced what had already been established. Logan's movement was uninterrupted, his departure unhesitating. There were no attempts to return, no pauses that suggested reconsideration, no signs of internal conflict visible in his behavior. From an observational standpoint, his actions were not only voluntary, they were efficient. Ella slowed the playback at one moment near the exit. Logan checked his phone. The timestamp appeared in the corner of the screen. 10:58 p.m. Ella cross-referenced it mentally with the financial document Michael had shown her earlier. Transfer authorization 10:52 p.m. 6 minutes. She allowed the footage to continue. Logan stepped through the automatic doors and disappeared from view. Ella closed the video. There was no need to replay it. The alignment was complete. She returned to the documents, now reading with a different level of precision. What had previously been separate categories, financial records, email communications, and video footage, were no longer separate. They formed a single structure, each element reinforcing the others. By the time she reached the final page, the narrative no longer required interpretation. It existed. And because it existed within verified systems, banking institutions, secured communication channels, and hospital surveillance, it could not be dismissed as subjective. There was a soft knock at the door before Michael Reed entered. He did not ask whether she had finished reviewing the material. He could see it in the way the documents had been arranged, in the stillness of her posture, in the absence of hesitation. "Is it complete?" Ella asked. Michael closed the door behind him before answering. "It is complete enough to proceed," he said. "We can continue to gather, but nothing essential is missing." Ella nodded once. "Then we proceed." Michael stepped closer to the table and placed an additional document in front of her. "A formal summary," he said. "Consolidated evidence. Structured for legal submission." Ella glanced at it but did not open it immediately. "What about exposure?" she asked. Michael understood the question. "Not yet public," he replied. "Internal presentation first. Controlled environment." Ella considered that. "Where?" she asked. "The hospital boardroom," Michael said. "It provides jurisdictional relevance and direct linkage to part of the evidence." Ella nodded. That made sense. The hospital was not only the site of the incident, It was also a controlled environment where documentation could be presented without interference. "Timeline?" she asked. "Within 48 hours," Michael replied. Ella leaned back slightly, absorbing the information not as a development but as confirmation of sequence. "Inform all necessary parties," she said. "No extensions." Michael inclined his head. "Understood." There was a brief silence. Then Michael added, "Logan will not be prepared for this." Ella looked at him. "That is not my responsibility," she said. Michael did not respond, because he understood that preparedness was not part of the structure Ella was building, only accuracy. He gathered the documents, leaving the summary within her reach. "I'll finalize the arrangements," he said. Ella nodded. After he left the room, returned to its familiar quiet. But the quiet was different now, not observational, not preparatory, active. Ella picked up the summary document and opened it. It began with a timeline, clear, linear, undisputed. From there it moved into supporting evidence, financial, communicative, visual. Each section reinforced the previous one. There were no gaps, no reliance on interpretation, only alignment. Ella read it once, then closed it. There was nothing to add, nothing to remove. The structure was complete. All that remained was presentation. Outside, the hospital continued its routine, unaware to most of what would soon unfold within its walls. Inside, Ella Vaughn sat in stillness, her attention no longer on gathering or understanding but on timing. Because timing, more than anything else, determined how truth was received. And she had waited long enough. The transition from preparation to action did not announce itself with visible force. It occurred through systems quietly, precisely, and without the need for explanation. By the following morning, the first formal procedures had already been set into motion, not as a reaction to Logan Cole's behavior, but as a structured response to documented facts that now required acknowledgement. Ella Vaughn did not initiate these procedures with a public declaration. She did not need to. Her authorization, delivered through Michael Reed and supported by the institutional framework of St. Meridian Medical Center, moved through legal and financial channels with the kind of efficiency that only long-established structures could provide. The first shift occurred within Logan's financial access. At 9:00 a.m., a formal notice was issued to all institutions associated with the accounts linked to his operations. The notice did not accuse. It did not imply wrongdoing. It stated in clear and neutral language that a review had been initiated under the authority of the primary ownership entity governing the assets. Pending the outcome of that review, all discretionary transactions were to remain restricted. From an external perspective, it appeared procedural. From Logan's perspective, it felt immediate. He received the notification while seated in his office, the message appearing not as a warning but as confirmation of what he had already begun to suspect. This time, however, the language was not ambiguous. It referenced authority. It referenced structure. And most importantly, it referenced a level of control that did not originate from him. Logan read the notice twice before setting his phone down. There was no visible reaction at first, no raised voice, no abrupt movement. Instead, there was stillness, a recalibration that began internally before it manifested externally. For years, he had operated with the assumption that the systems around him existed as tools, accessible, responsive, and ultimately subordinate to his decisions. That assumption was no longer holding. He reached for his phone again and called Michael Reed. Call connected after 2 rings. "Mr. Cole," Michael said, his tone measured. "What is this?" Logan asked, dispensing, with any pretense of formality. "A procedural review," Michael replied. "Under whose authority?" Logan pressed. There was a brief pause, not hesitation but acknowledgement of the question's weight. "Under the authority of the controlling entity attached to the accounts," Michael said. Logan's jaw tightened slightly. "Be specific." Michael did not raise his voice. "Miss Vaughn." The name settled into the conversation with a clarity that removed any remaining ambiguity. Logan exhaled slowly, the sound controlled but deliberate. "This is unnecessary," he said. "If there's a concern, we can resolve it directly." Michael allowed a moment to pass before responding. "The review is not based on concern," he said. "It is based on documentation. Logan stood moving toward the window of his office, his reflection faintly visible against the glass. "What documentation?" he asked. "You'll be informed through the appropriate channels," Michael replied. The phrasing was identical to what Ella had said the previous day. Logan recognized it, and in that recognition something shifted not externally but internally. A pattern was forming, one that did not include him as a participant. "You're representing her," Logan said. "I am representing the process," Michael replied. Logan ended the call without further comment. For several seconds he remained standing, his gaze fixed on the city below, though he was not seeing it. His thoughts moved quickly now, no longer attempting to deny the situation, but attempting to understand its boundaries. Financial restriction, legal review, Ella's involvement. The elements aligned, but not in a way that made sense within his previous understanding of their relationship. Because in that understanding, Ella had always remained adjacent to his operations, not central to them. That assumption was now being dismantled. Across the city, Claire Donovan experienced the shift differently. Her access had not been fully restricted, but it had been altered. Notifications appeared where there had previously been none. Transactions required additional verification. Certain transfers were delayed without explanation. She noticed immediately, not because she was alarmed, but because she was attentive to systems. She called Logan. He answered this time. "What's happening?" she asked. "It's being handled," he said. The response was immediate but not explanatory. Claire paused. "Handled how?" she asked. "A review," Logan replied. "Temporary." The word did not settle as easily as he intended. "By who?" she asked. There was a brief silence. "Ella," Logan said. Claire did not respond immediately. The name spoken without qualification shifted something in her understanding. "She has that authority?" she asked. Logan did not answer directly. "It's complicated," he said. Claire leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression remaining composed but her focus sharpening. "You said everything was already separated," she said. Logan exhaled quietly. "It is," he replied. "This is just procedural overlap." The explanation lacked precision. Claire recognized that, but she did not challenge it further. Not yet. Because like Ella, she understood the value of observation before conclusion. "I'll wait," she said. "Do that," Logan replied. The call ended. Claire remained still for a moment longer, her gaze resting on the screen in front of her. For the first time since their relationship had begun, a question formed that she could not immediately resolve. Not about Logan's actions, but about the structure he operated within. Back at St. Meridian, the next phase was already underway. Michael Reed sat across from Ella Vaughn in the same controlled quiet of her hospital room, a new set of documents placed between them. Unlike the previous materials, which had focused on gathering and alignment, these documents represented initiation, formal filings, legal notices, structured claims. Ella reviewed them without interruption. Each page was precise, each statement supported by documentation she had already verified. There were no surprises, only formalization. Once submitted, Michael said, the process becomes visible. Ella nodded. "That is acceptable." Michael studied her for a moment. "You understand that visibility changes the dynamic," he added. "Yes," Ella replied. "It clarifies it." Michael inclined his head slightly. "Then we proceed." Ella signed the first document. Her signature was steady, unhurried, and placed exactly where it needed to be. No emphasis, no hesitation, just completion. She moved to the next, then the next. Each signature carried the same weight, not emotional but structural. By the time she finished, the transition was complete. What had been observation was now action. What had been contained was now in motion. Michael gathered the documents carefully. "I'll file these immediately," he said. Ella nodded. As he stood to leave, she spoke once more. "No delays," she said. "There won't be," Michael replied. After he left, the room returned to stillness. But it was no longer the stillness of recovery. It was the stillness of a system that had already begun to move. Across the city, Logan Cole remained in his office, attempting to re-establish control through calls, through access requests, through the familiar mechanisms that had always responded to him. But the responses had changed. They were slower, more formal, more distant, and with each attempt, the pattern became clearer. This was not resistance. It was structure. And for the first time, Logan was not inside it. He was subject to it. The boardroom at Street Meridian Medical Center had been designed for discretion long before it was ever used for exposure. Situated on the administrative floor, removed from the flow of patients and insulated from unnecessary interruption, the room carried an atmosphere that did not invite performance. It was not a space where voices rose or gestures became exaggerated. It was a space where information was presented, examined, and understood without distortion. On the morning of the meeting, every detail had already been arranged. The long walnut table had been cleared of anything unnecessary. Each seat held a single folder identical in appearance, labeled only with a date and a reference code. A large screen stood at the far end of the room, connected to a secured system that had been verified twice for accuracy and access control. No one arrived late. Dr. Daniel Harris took his seat first, his expression neutral, his posture composed. Beside him sat the hospital's compliance officer, then two board members whose roles extended beyond administration into oversight of institutional governance. Michael Reed stood near the head of the table, reviewing the final sequence of materials. He did not appear rushed, nor did he repeat his preparation. The structure had already been confirmed. What remained was execution. Logan Cole entered last. He had not been given full details about the purpose of the meeting, only that his presence was required in connection with a formal review involving hospital records and associated documentation. The phrasing had been deliberate. It did not accuse. It did not explain. It required attendance. Logan stepped into the room with the same controlled confidence he had carried into most professional settings throughout his career. His suit was precise, his posture aligned, his expression neutral enough to suggest composure rather than concern. But the moment he took in the room, the arrangement, the number of people present, the absence of informal conversation, something shifted. Not visibly, but internally, because this was not a meeting structured for negotiation. It was structured for presentation. "Mr. Cole," Michael said, acknowledging him with a slight inclination of his head. "Please take a seat." Logan did not respond verbally. He moved to the chair, indicated his gaze briefly, passing over the folders, the screen, the individuals already seated. No one offered small talk. No one attempted to ease the atmosphere. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was intentional. Once Logan was seated, Michael closed the door. The sound was soft but final. He moved to the head of the table and placed his hands lightly on the surface, not in a gesture of authority but of structure. "This meeting is being conducted to present documented information relevant to an incident that occurred within this facility," he began. His tone was even measured and entirely without emphasis. "All materials have been verified for accuracy and are supported by institutional records." Logan leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unchanged. "What incident?" he asked. Michael did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a remote and activated the screen. The first image appeared. A timestamp. An exterior camera view of the emergency entrance. Date and time clearly visible. Then the footage began. Paramedics entering with a patient. Controlled urgency. Staff responding. Logan watched. At first, his expression did not change, because the scene in isolation did not yet carry implication. Then he appeared in the frame, standing, observing. Michael allowed the footage to continue without commentary. No narration, no interpretation, only sequence. The camera shifted to the interior corridor. Logan followed the staff. A clipboard was presented. He signed. The timestamp aligned. Michael paused the video. "Consent authorization," he said. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The image remained on the screen for a moment longer before the footage resumed. The next segment showed Logan in conversation with Dr. Harris. No audio. Only movement. Explanation. Response. A brief gesture of dismissal. Then departure. Logan turned and walked toward the exit. The doors opened. Closed. The footage ended. The screen went still. Silence filled the room, but it was not empty. It was occupied by what had just been seen. Logan's gaze remained on the screen for a moment longer before shifting to Michael. "I don't see the issue," he said. His tone was controlled, but there was a slight tightening beneath it. Michael nodded once. "Understood," he replied. He pressed the remote again. The screen changed. Now it displayed a document. A financial record. Time-stamped. Logan's name. Transfer authorization. Michael spoke without raising his voice. "This transaction was executed at 10:52 p.m., he said. He paused briefly, allowing the number to settle. "Then, 6 minutes prior to your departure from the facility." Logan's expression shifted, not dramatically but enough to register. "That's unrelated," he said. Michael did not respond immediately. He pressed the remote again. The screen changed once more. Email correspondence. Highlighted sections. Logan's words. References to asset restructuring, to separation, to timing. Michael allowed the room to absorb it. Then he spoke. "These communications align with the financial activity and the timeline of your presence within this facility." Logan leaned forward slightly now. "This is being taken out of context," he said. The statement was firm, but it lacked the certainty that had defined his earlier tone. Michael met his gaze. "There is no context added," he said. "Only alignment." The word settled heavily, because alignment removed interpretation. It left only structure. Logan's eyes moved briefly across the room. No one interrupted. No one reacted visibly. Dr. Harris remained still. The board members observed. The compliance officer took notes. There was no opposition, no support, only acknowledgement. Michael placed a final document on the table in front of Logan. "A consolidated report," he said. "You may review it." Logan did not reach for it immediately, because by now he understood what it contained. Not accusation, not speculation, but sequence. And sequence once complete did not require explanation. For the first time since the meeting began, Logan's composure showed a fracture, not outwardly dramatic but internally evident. The structure he had relied on, the one that had allowed him to act without consequence, to move between decisions without alignment, was no longer available to him. He was no longer operating within the system. He was inside its record. "This is unnecessary," he said finally, though the statement lacked the certainty it once would have carried. Michael did not respond to the assertion. Instead, he closed the folder in front of him. "This concludes the presentation," he said. "No final statement. No verdict, because none was required. The information had already fulfilled its purpose." Logan sat in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because there was nothing left to adjust. Around him, the room remained unchanged. No one moved to comfort. No one moved to challenge. The system had done what it was designed to do. It had presented the truth, and the truth, once presented in full, required no reinforcement. The aftermath did not arrive as a single collapse. It unfolded in layers. For Logan Cole, the first layer was not public exposure, nor immediate legal consequence. It was isolation within systems he had once navigated with ease. After the meeting at Street Meridian, he returned to his office, expecting if not resolution, then at least the beginning of negotiation. Instead, what he encountered was something far less direct and far more decisive. Silence. Not the absence of communication, but the presence of controlled distance. Calls that had once been returned within minutes were now acknowledged with delays. Emails that would have prompted discussion were answered with formal language and limited scope. Partners who had relied on Logan's decisiveness now deferred to ongoing review processes. No one accused him. No one confronted him. But the alignment had shifted. Logan was no longer central. He was conditional. The distinction, though subtle, carried weight. By the second day after the meeting, the financial restrictions had expanded into formal oversight. Notifications arrived from multiple institutions, each structured with careful neutrality, each referencing the same underlying authority. Accounts remained accessible for viewing, but not for execution. Pending reviews had not been resolved. They had been extended. Logan attempted to reassert control through familiar channels. He contacted his legal advisors, external ones, not Michael Reed, expecting intervention. The response, while polite, was cautious. They requested documentation, clarification. Time which he had once controlled, now became a variable outside his reach. He called Claire. She answered, but her tone had changed, not dramatically, but enough to register. "Did you know?" she asked. The question came without preamble. Logan paused. "No," what he replied. Claire exhaled slowly. "That she has controlling authority over your accounts," she said. The phrasing was precise. Not emotional, but not neutral either. Logan moved toward the window again, repeating the same position he had taken days before, though this time the gesture carried less confidence. "It's complicated," he said. Claire did not respond immediately. "Then explain it," she said. Logan hesitated. Because explanation required structure. And structure was what he no longer fully understood. "She was involved early on," he said. "There were arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" Claire asked. "Financial," Logan replied. "Support. Investment." Claire absorbed that. "And you didn't think that mattered now?" she asked. Logan turned slightly, his expression tightening. "It doesn't change what I built," he said. Claire's silence extended for a moment longer than before. Then, "That's not what I asked." The difference between the two statements lingered. Logan did not answer. Because for the first time, the narrative he had maintained of independence, of separation of control, was encountering resistance not from systems but from perception. Claire continued, her voice still measured but now carrying a sharper clarity. "You told me everything was already separated," she said. "That there was no overlap." Logan exhaled. "It was being handled," he replied. The repetition of the phrase did not reinforce it. It weakened it. Claire recognized that. "I need to understand what I'm involved in," she said. Logan's response came more quickly this time. "You're not involved," he said. The statement was intended to reassure. Instead, it created distance. Claire leaned back slightly, her gaze steady. "That's not true," she said. Logan did not argue. Because the evidence of her involvement, financial, communicative, structural, had already been established elsewhere. Not in conversation. In record. "I'll call you later," he said. Claire did not stop him. The call ended. She remained still for several seconds, her attention fixed not on the device in her hand, but on the implications that had begun to form. For months she had operated under the assumption that she was entering a space that had already been cleared. Now she understood that the space had never been empty. It had been structured, and she had stepped into it without full visibility. Across the city, Logan's isolation deepened. By the end of the week, 2 of his major partners had requested formal reviews of their agreements. Not cancellations yet, but reassessments. The language remained professional, the tone respectful, but the intent was unmistakable. Risk. Logan had become one. Not through accusation, through association. His attempts to stabilize the situation became increasingly fragmented. Meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. Internal staff, once responsive, now deferred decisions upward or outward to entities Logan could not directly influence. For the first time in years, he found himself reacting instead of directing, and reaction in his experience had always been a sign of diminished control. Meanwhile, Ella Vaughn remained within the hospital, but no longer as a patient confined to recovery. Her physical condition had improved steadily, allowing her to sit upright for extended periods, to review documents without interruption, and to engage with Michael Reed and Dr. Harris in a capacity that extended beyond medical care. She did not monitor Logan directly. She did not need to. The system did that for her. Reports arrived at measured intervals, each one concise, each one verified. Financial updates, communication logs, external responses. Ella reviewed them without urgency, because urgency implied uncertainty, and there was none. One afternoon, as the light shifted through the window in the same controlled pattern she had come to recognize, Michael Reed entered with a new set of documents. "External responses," he said, placing them on the table. Ella nodded. "Proceed," she said. Michael opened the first document. "2 partners have initiated contractual reviews," he said. "No termination yet, but they've requested disclosure of financial governance." Ella absorbed that. "Expected," she said. Michael continued. "Claire Donovan has not taken formal action," he added, "but her communication frequency with Logan has decreased." Ella did not respond, because Claire was not the focus. Not yet. "What about filings?" Ella asked. Michael placed another document in front of her. "Submitted," he said. "Processing has begun." Ella looked at the page briefly. No reaction. Only acknowledgement. "Timeline?" she asked. "Initial hearing scheduled within 2 weeks," Michael replied. Ella nodded once. Everything was proceeding as structured. No acceleration, no delay, just sequence. Michael watched her for a moment. "There's one more consideration," he said. Ella looked at him. "Public exposure," he added. "Once the hearing begins, information may extend beyond controlled channels." Ella considered that. "Not as a risk, as a variable. Then we maintain accuracy," she said. Michael inclined his head. "Of course. Because accuracy in this context was not just protection. It was inevitability." After he left, Ella remained seated, her attention resting not on the documents but on the space they represented. The structure was no longer forming. It had formed. What remained now was consequence. Not imposed, not forced, but derived. From actions already taken. From decisions already recorded. From patterns already completed. Across the city, Logan Cole continued to move through a system that no longer responded to him as it once had. Each attempt to regain control revealed another layer of limitation, another boundary he had not anticipated, another alignment that existed without his input. He had not yet collapsed. Not visibly, but the structure that had supported him was no longer stable. And without that structure, everything he had built began to shift, not all at once, but steadily, irreversibly. The courtroom did not carry the same controlled familiarity as the hospital boardroom, but it shared one essential quality. It was a space where structure replaced narrative. Unlike conversations where tone could influence interpretation, or meetings where presence could shape perception, the courtroom required alignment, evidence presented in sequence, supported by documentation, and measured against standards that did not adjust for personal intent. Ella Vaughn entered that space without ceremony. She was no longer in a hospital bed, though the effects of her injury remained visible in the careful way she carried her left shoulder. Her movements were deliberate, not limited. Recovery had progressed enough to allow presence, and presence in this setting was sufficient. She took her seat beside Michael Reed, without acknowledging the room beyond what was necessary. Logan Cole was already there. He stood near the opposing table, speaking quietly with his legal counsel, external representation engaged after the initial proceedings had made clear that this was no longer a matter that could be managed internally. His posture remained composed, his expression controlled, but the consistency that had once defined his demeanor had begun to fragment. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. He noticed Ella as she entered. Their eyes met briefly. Ella did not hold the gaze. Not out of avoidance, but out of irrelevance. The court clerk called the session to order. Everyone took their seats. The judge entered without delay, a presence that did not require introduction. There was no performance in the way the proceedings began, only sequence. Case number, parties involved, scope of review. Michael Reed rose when prompted. His approach did not rely on emphasis. He did not raise his voice, nor did he frame his presentation with emotional language. Instead, he began with the structure that had been established over the past days, one that did not require reinforcement. "Your Honor," he said, "we present a sequence of documented actions, each supported by verifiable records across independent systems." He paused briefly, not for effect, but for clarity. These records include financial transactions, secured communications, and institutional documentation originating from Street Meridian Medical Center. There was no objection. Logan's counsel did not interrupt. Because the introduction did not present a claim, it presented a framework. Michael proceeded. The first exhibit was submitted. A timeline. Clear. Linear. From the evening of the accident to the subsequent financial activity, each entry aligned with a timestamp. Each timestamp aligned with a record. Ella did not look at Logan. She did not need to. The timeline was not for her. It was for the court. The second exhibit followed. Financial records. Transfer authorizations bearing Logan's signature. Dates and amounts displayed without commentary. Michael did not interpret them. He did not suggest motive. He allowed the numbers to stand. Logan's counsel leaned forward slightly, reviewing the documents as they were presented, but did not object, because the records had already been verified. The third exhibit, email correspondence, selected excerpts not for tone but for alignment, messages referencing asset movement, references to restructuring, timing that corresponded precisely with the financial records already submitted. The court remained silent, not disengaged, focused. Michael moved to the fourth exhibit, security footage, not played in full but summarized and accompanied by still frames extracted at key moments. Logan's presence within the hospital, his signature on the consent form, his departure, the timestamps aligned with the previously submitted financial activity. The sequence completed itself. Michael stepped back slightly. "This presentation does not rely on interpretation," he said. "It relies on alignment." The words settled into the room because alignment removed argument. It left only structure. The judge reviewed the materials without comment, her attention moving steadily across the documents. Logan's counsel stood. "Your Honor," he began, "we do not dispute the existence of these records." The statement was careful. It acknowledged without conceding. However, he continued, "We request consideration of context. The actions presented financial transfers, communication, and presence within the hospital occurred within a broader personal and professional framework that has not been fully explored." He paused. "There is no evidence of intent to deceive within the scope presented." Michael did not respond immediately, because the statement did not challenge the records. It attempted to reposition them. When he did speak, his tone remained unchanged. "Intent," he said, "is not required to establish sequence." The distinction was precise, and it held. The judge looked between the two counsels, then back to the documents. "Is there additional evidence to be presented?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "No, Your Honor. The record is complete." Logan's counsel hesitated briefly, then said, "No further evidence at this time." The judge nodded once. She did not rush her response. She reviewed the materials again, not in detail, but in confirmation. Then she spoke. "The court recognizes that the evidence presented establishes a consistent and verifiable sequence of actions," she said. Her voice was measured, devoid of emphasis. "These actions, when considered collectively, demonstrate a pattern of financial movement and associated conduct that falls within the scope of the claims filed." She paused briefly. "The absence of dispute regarding those records themselves further supports their validity." Logan remained still. His expression did not collapse, but something within it shifted subtly but irreversibly. Because the structure he had once relied on, flexible, responsive, shaped by interpretation, was no longer present. In its place was something else, fixed, documented, unaffected by explanation. The judge continued. "The court will proceed with the determination based on the evidence submitted. A formal ruling will be issued following review." She closed the file in front of her. "This session is adjourned." The sound of the gavel was not loud. It did not need to be. The room began to move again. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. Conversations resumed in low, controlled tones. Logan remained where he was for a moment longer, his attention fixed not on the room but on the space the proceedings had occupied. There had been no confrontation, no accusation, no dramatic revelation. And yet, everything had changed. Ella stood. Her movement was careful but steady. She did not look toward Logan as she gathered her things. Michael Reed spoke to her quietly, outlining the next procedural steps, but his tone carried no urgency, because the essential work had already been done. As they moved toward the exit, Logan finally spoke. "Ella." The name stopped in the space between them. Ella paused, not immediately, but after a moment. She turned slightly, not fully toward him, but enough to acknowledge his presence. Logan stepped forward. "There's still time to resolve this," he said. His voice was controlled, but the certainty that had once defined it was no longer intact. Ella looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something else. Finality. "The sequence is already complete," she said. The words were quiet, but they did not require volume. Logan's response did not come, because for the first time he understood what she meant. This was no longer a situation that could be adjusted. It was a structure that had already been built, and he was inside it. Ella turned and continued toward the exit. She did not look back. Not because she needed distance, but because there was nothing left to observe. The days following the hearing did not bring immediate resolution, but they brought something more definitive: recognition. Not the kind that arrives publicly announced through headlines or statements, but the kind that settles into systems, into professional networks, into the quiet understanding that alters how people respond without needing to explain why. For Logan Cole, that recognition manifested as absence. Not complete absence. He was still present in his office, still listed in his company's structure, still reachable, but the quality of interaction had changed. Conversations shortened, responses delayed. Invitations once frequent and assumed no longer arrived. He was not removed. He was no longer relied upon. That distinction, though subtle, carried more weight than any direct rejection could have. On the third day after the hearing, Logan received notice that one of his long-standing partners had formally suspended their agreement pending the court's final ruling. The language was precise, carefully constructed to avoid implication, while still signaling withdrawal. Temporary suspension. Pending review. Future reconsideration. Each phrase suggested possibility. None guaranteed it. Logan read the notice in silence, then placed it aside without comment. His office, once a space that reflected expansion and control, now felt contained, not physically smaller but structurally limited. He had not yet lost everything, but he could no longer expand anything. That, to him, was a greater disruption. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen before answering. Claire Donovan. He hesitated for a moment, just long enough to register the choice, then answered. Claire. Her voice, when it came, was composed but no longer aligned with the rhythm they had shared before. I read the filing, she said. Logan did not respond immediately, because the filing, now accessible through formal channels, had extended beyond the contained structure of the hospital and the courtroom. It had entered the space where interpretation could occur, where individuals outside the system began to form their own understanding. It's not what it looks like, he said. The phrase came automatically. Familiar, but less effective. Claire did not challenge it directly. Instead, she asked, "What is it then?" Logan exhaled slowly. "A sequence taken out of context," he replied. Claire allowed a brief silence to settle before responding. "That's not how it reads," she said. Logan moved toward the window again, repeating the motion that had become habitual in recent days, though now it carried less purpose. "You're basing that on incomplete information," he said. Claire's tone remained steady. "I'm basing it on documented information," she replied. The distinction mirrored one that had already been established elsewhere. Logan closed his eyes briefly. "This isn't your concern," he said. Another familiar phrase. Another attempt to narrow the scope. Claire's response came without delay. "It is," she said. Logan turned slightly, his reflection faint against the glass. "How?" he asked. There was no accusation in his tone, only a question that had not been asked before. Claire answered with clarity. "Because I'm in the records," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not emotional. Structural. Logan did not respond immediately, because the statement was not something he could dismiss. It was fact. Claire continued, her voice still controlled, but now carrying a level of distance that had not been present before. "You told me this was already resolved," she said, "that there was nothing left to manage." Logan remained silent. "And now I'm reading about accounts, transfers, timelines, things I wasn't informed about," she added. Logan opened his eyes. "It was being handled," he said again. The repetition no longer reinforced the statement. It exposed it. Claire recognized that. "I don't think you understand what this looks like," she said. Logan turned fully, now facing the room rather than the window. "Then explain it to me," he said. Claire paused briefly. "Then it looks like you moved assets while your wife was still structurally connected to everything," she said. "It looks like you made decisions assuming separation that hadn't actually occurred." Logan's expression tightened. "That's not accurate," he said. Claire did not raise her voice. "Then what is accurate?" she asked. Logan did not answer, because accuracy in this context required alignment with records that had already been established, and he no longer controlled those records. The silence extended. Then Claire spoke again. "I'm stepping back," she said. The statement was not dramatic, not final in tone, but definitive in structure. Logan's gaze sharpened slightly. "For how long?" he asked. Claire considered the question. "Until I understand what I'm attached to," she said. Logan exhaled. "You're overreacting," he said. Claire did not respond to the characterization. "I'm adjusting," she replied. The words settled into the space between them, because adjustment, unlike reaction, implied control, and control was what Logan no longer held. "I'll be in touch," Claire added. The call ended. Logan remained standing in the center of the room, the phone still in his hand. There was no immediate follow-up, no second call, no attempt to reframe the conversation, because for the first time he did not have a structure to rely on. Everything he had built professionally, financially, personally, had been constructed within a framework he had never fully examined, and that framework had shifted. Not suddenly, but completely. Across the city, Ella Vaughn prepared to leave the hospital. Her discharge had been scheduled without urgency, aligned with her recovery and the completion of the processes she had initiated. There was no ceremony attached to it, no announcement. The hospital functioned as it always had, and her departure was treated with the same discretion that had defined her presence within it. Dr. Daniel Harris stood near the doorway as she reviewed the final documents. "Everything is in order," he said. Ella nodded, closing the folder. "Thank you," she replied. Dr. Harris inclined his head slightly. "If you require anything further, I won't," Ella said. The statement was not dismissive. It was complete. Dr. Harris understood. He had seen enough to know that what had begun within these walls no longer required them. As he stepped aside, Megan Brooks entered, carrying a small set of personal items that had been collected and secured during Ella's admission. "Your belongings," she said. Ella accepted them. "Thank you," she said. Megan hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I hope," she began, then stopped. Ella looked at her, not expectantly, but attentively. Megan adjusted her words. "I hope everything resolves clearly," she said. Ella held her gaze briefly. "It already has," she replied. Megan nodded, though she did not fully understand the statement, because resolution in the sense Ella referred to was not dependent on outcome. It was dependent on structure. Ella moved toward the door. Her steps were measured, her posture steady despite the residual limitations of her injury. She did not rush, nor did she pause unnecessarily. The hallway outside remained unchanged. Staff moved with the same efficiency. Patients continued through their routines. Nothing marked her departure as significant. And that was intentional, because significance in this case did not require visibility. As she reached the exit, Ella paused briefly, not to look back, but to register the space one final time. The hospital had done what it was designed to do. It had recorded, preserved, presented. There was nothing more to extract from it. She stepped outside. The light was different now, open, unfiltered, no longer contained by glass or structure. Ella adjusted slightly to it, then continued forward. Not away from something, but beyond it. The final ruling did not arrive with urgency. It arrived with precision. 2 weeks after the hearing, the decision was issued through formal channels, documented in language that did not dramatize its conclusions but did not dilute them either. The court did not interpret beyond the evidence, nor did it speculate about intent. It recognized structure, sequence, and alignment, and it ruled accordingly. For Logan Cole, the ruling did not feel like an ending. It felt like confirmation of something that had already begun. By the time the decision reached him, much of what it formalized had already taken shape in practice. His access to financial systems remained restricted now, not as a temporary review, but as a reallocation of authority. Partnerships that had entered suspension did not return to negotiation. They moved quietly and decisively toward dissolution. His company, once centered around his direction, had shifted into a state of cautious autonomy. Senior staff began to operate through alternative reporting structures. Decisions that would have required his approval were now routed through compliance frameworks he did not control. He was still present, but he was no longer central. The ruling did not remove him. It defined him. Across the document, the language remained consistent. Verified sequence, documented alignment, transfer of authority. Each phrase carried the same underlying conclusion: the system had recognized a pattern and adjusted to it. Logan read the ruling in his office, the same space where he had once believed every decision began and ended. Now it felt like a place he occupied rather than directed. He set the document down slowly, his movements controlled, but without the certainty that had once defined them. There was no immediate response, no call, no attempt to challenge, because the ruling had not introduced anything new. It had only formalized what had already been established. For the first time since the process began, Logan allowed himself to sit without attempting to resolve what he could not change. The silence that followed was not imposed. It was inevitable. His phone remained still. The absence of calls, of demands, of expectations, something that would have once signaled control now reflected something else entirely: completion. Across the city, Ella Vaughn received the same ruling in a different context. She was no longer in the hospital, no longer surrounded by systems that had facilitated the initial sequence. She stood instead in a quiet office, overlooking a different part of the city, one not connected to Logan's operations, not tied to the structures that had defined the past months. The Vaughn Foundation building, a space she had always maintained, though rarely occupied in person. Michael Reed stood across from her, the document open between them. "The court has finalized its decision," he said. Ella nodded once. "I've read it," she replied. There was no need to review it again. Not because it lacked importance, but because it contained nothing unexpected. Michael observed her for a moment. "There are follow-up procedures," he said. "Asset reallocation, final account restructuring, formal closure of joint structures." Ella listened. "Proceed," she said. Michael inclined his head. "Understood." He paused briefly, then added, "There will likely be external acknowledgement. Limited but present." Ella considered that. "Accuracy will be maintained," she said. Michael nodded. Because accuracy, as it had been from the beginning, was not a strategy. It was the structure itself. After he left, Ella remained alone in the office. The city extended beyond the window, its movement steady and different to the sequence that had just concluded. She placed the document on the desk, not with emphasis but with completion. There was no sense of victory, no visible satisfaction, because what had occurred had not been a contest. It had been a process, and the process had reached its end. She moved toward the window, her posture relaxed, her breathing even. For a moment she allowed herself to remain still, not observing, not analyzing, simply present. Then she turned back to the desk. There were other documents waiting, not related to Logan, not connected to the past. New structures, new decisions. She began reviewing them without hesitation. Because forward movement did not require transition, only continuation. Elsewhere, Logan remained in his office, the ruling still open on his desk. For the first time in weeks, he did not attempt to call anyone. He did not reach for solutions that no longer existed. Instead, he sat in the quiet recognition of what had unfolded, not as a sudden collapse, but as a gradual removal of assumptions he had never questioned. His understanding of control had been built on access to systems, to resources, to decisions. He had mistaken that access for ownership, and ownership, once clarified, had not remained with him. He thought of Ella, not as she had been in the past, quiet, observant, undefined, but as she had been in the hospital, still, certain, unresponsive to the narratives he had attempted to maintain. He understood now, though too late to alter anything, that her silence had not been absence. It had been structure, a way of allowing everything to align without interference. He had moved freely within that silence, believing it meant he was unobserved. He had been wrong. The realization did not come with anger, nor with immediate regret. It came with clarity, and clarity, once reached, did not require expression. Logan stood slowly, moving toward the window as he had so many times before, though now the gesture carried no expectation of resolution. The city remained unchanged. Movement continued. Nothing paused. Nothing adjusted for him. He remained there for a moment, then turned back toward the room. There was nothing left to manage, nothing left to recover. Only what remained to be understood. Across the city, Ella Vaughn stepped out of the Vaughn Foundation building later that evening. The air carried a different quality than the controlled environment of the hospital, less contained, more variable. She adjusted her pace slightly, not out of discomfort but in acknowledgement of change. There were no cameras documenting this moment, no records being compiled, no systems aligning around her. And that in itself marked the difference. Because what needed to be recorded had already been recorded. What needed to be presented had already been presented. What needed to be resolved had already been resolved. Ella walked forward without looking back. Not because the past held no significance, but because it no longer required her attention. The sequence had completed, and with it everything that depended on it. She did not carry the outcome with her as a victory. She carried it as structure. Something finished, something closed, something that did not need to be repeated. The city continued around her unchanged and unobservant. Ella Vaughn moved through it quietly. Not unseen, but no longer required to be seen. In the end, nothing in this story unfolded loudly. There were no dramatic confrontations, no raised voices that forced the truth into the open. Instead, everything revealed itself the way it often does in real life, through patterns, through records, through moments that seem small until they align into something undeniable. Ella never needed to argue. She never needed to prove herself through emotion. She simply allowed the truth to exist long enough to be seen clearly. And when it was, it spoke for her. There is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention or validation. It waits, observes, and moves only when the moment no longer requires force, only precision. If this story stayed with you even quietly, you can take a moment to let it be heard. Like a comment, or simply sharing where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Small things that remind us these stories travel further than we think. And if you believe that dignity, when held long enough, always finds its way to the surface, you may already understand why stories like this continue. Not for noise, but for truth that doesn't need to be raised to be recognized.